Everyone wants compound results, but few have the patience for the compound process. Think of leadership like the stock market. You don't see returns in a week. What you do see is growth that compounds over time. Too many business owners are like water at 33 degrees. You're full of potential. You're 1 degree away from that breakthrough. But you quit too early because the process feels invisible, like nothing's happening. But beneath the surface, transformation is forming. You don't see compound growth in 1 week, whether it's in stocks or leadership or discipleship. But the truth is, consistency compounds. Jesus didn't rush Peter's development. He let him fail and learn and repent and rise, because leadership isn't built overnight, it's completed over time. And completion requires intentionality. I'm Tyler, and this is Mission Driven Profits. Today, I'll show you how the law of the process turns your gifts into greatness, and how consistency compounds like interest until breakthrough comes. Your capacity from the law of the lid, your influence from the law of influence, they both depend on this one truth. Leadership develops daily, not in a day. So let's build your leadership portfolio the Jesus way. Before we dive in, if you're building a faith-driven business and want to grow with biblical principles that actually work, hit subscribe now. Your subscription helps me keep this content completely free while we build a community of faith-driven leaders who just refuse to plateau. And comment below, what's the one area of leadership you've stopped developing lately? I read every comment, and your answers might shape the next episode, so let's go. Here's what I see constantly in the business space. Leaders chasing breakthroughs through intensity instead of consistency. They're burning out trying to force results. They're making impulsive decisions under pressure. They're looking for the miracle instead of accepting the process. And when the results don't come fast enough, they abandon the very practices that would have produced the breakthrough that they're chasing. I worked with a tech founder. He was a brilliant strategist, incredible work ethic. He hit 2.3 million in revenue in just 3 years through pure hustle. But then everything collapsed. His team was exhausted and his health was failing. And he told me something that just broke my heart. He said, "Tyler, I thought moving fast meant I was trusting God. I thought intensity proved my faith. But I realized now I was just running from the discipline of process." Here's what he missed. Process feels invisible, like nothing's happening. But beneath the surface, transformation is occurring. See, when water is at 33 degrees, it looks and feels like water. There is no visible difference from 70 degrees. But 1 degree matters. 1 more degree and everything changes. That liquid, it becomes a solid. The fragile, it becomes a foundation. And that's what process does. It looks like nothing's happening until suddenly everything changes. The tragedy? Most leaders quit at 33 degrees, thinking that they're just wasting time. They never reach the breakthrough because they abandon the process before it crystallizes. Jesus understood something we've forgotten. Preparation precedes promotion, and process precedes power. And the leaders who are actually changing industries, they're the ones who refuse to skip the process. John Maxwell calls this the law of process, and it builds directly on everything we've studied. The law of the lid showed us your leadership capacity determines your ceiling. The law of influence showed us that true leadership is earned, not demanded. The law of process is how you raise the lid and expand your influence over time. Here's the reality that most Christian entrepreneurs refuse to face. You may be naturally gifted in a few leadership areas. Maybe you're a visionary. Maybe you're charismatic. Maybe you're analytically brilliant. But the secret to sustained success isn't relying on natural giftings. It's learning a complete collection of skills: communication, decision-making, emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, coaching others, financial acumen, team development. That's why Maxwell calls it the law of the process. Leadership is developed, not born, and development takes intentionality. Think of it like compound interest in the stock market. Every dollar invested, every bit of learning, every moment of consistency adds value, even when you can't see it immediately. The market may fluctuate wildly, and short-term traders, they're going to panic. But steady, consistent investors always outperform the people chasing quick gains. It's identical in leadership. If you want lasting power, you have to rely on the process, not the shortcut. Here's what separates leaders who plateau at 2 million from leaders who scale to 50 million. The $50 million leaders didn't get smarter overnight. They didn't get luckier. They committed to the daily development that compounded over years. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty." That's not an accidental scripture placement. Diligent, consistent, intentional daily development, that's what builds sustainable leadership power. But here's the encouraging truth. You don't need to be a genius to benefit from process. You just need to be consistent. And consistency is available to anyone who is willing to choose it. To understand the power of process, study the master, Jesus, who refused to take shortcuts even when he had the power to. Jesus built his team through process, not pressure. He didn't anoint overnight success. He developed consistent servants. Consider his timeline. He spent 30 years in Nazareth before one public miracle. 30 years of preparation. 30 years where nothing visible happened from the world's perspective. But every one of those days was forming the man who would change history. Then he trained through repetition. Miracles, teachings, field assignments, and feedback. When the disciples failed, and they failed constantly, he didn't replace them, he refined them. Thomas refused to believe Jesus had risen unless he could physically touch the wounds himself. That kind of doubt could have disqualified him from the apostolic leadership. But Jesus didn't dismiss him or move on to a more faithful candidate. A week later, he appeared specifically for Thomas. He invited him to touch and see his wounds. And this transformed his doubt into unshakable conviction. That's process. Doubt isn't disqualification, it's part of the development. Jesus refined through failure. Thomas's doubt became his faith. James and John's selfish ambition became their apostolic courage. The disciples' fear at the crucifixion became boldness at Pentecost. And then there's the multiplication phase. By Acts 2, those 12 men, the same ones who had abandoned Jesus at the crucifixion, they were leading thousands. Not because they suddenly got more talented, but because the process had crystallized them. They had reached that moment where the liquid had become solid. Why? Because Jesus understood the compounding power of process. Every conversation added another degree. Every correction refined them. Every test prepared them. Every experience built capacity. And when the moment came, when they stood before the Sanhedrin, when they faced persecution, when they carried the gospel across the continents, they were ready. Why? Because 30 years of development had prepared them for moments they couldn't have imagined. Here's a question for you. When your moment comes, will you be ready? Or will you still be waiting for the process to work? Because here's what I've learned. Process is God's preparation for promotion. The two are inseparable. I want to tell you about Sarah, the business owner I started working with 2 years ago. She was at 1.8 million in revenue. She was stuck there for 3 years and working long hours. When I asked about her leadership development plan, she looked at me confused because she didn't have one. She said, "I'm too busy building a business. I don't have time to build myself." And that's the trap. We think we don't have time for process because we're too focused on production. But production without development is unsustainable. So we made a covenant. I didn't ask her to work harder. I asked her to work differently. 1 leadership book per month committed to on her calendar. 1 podcast per week listened to during her commute. 1 hour of reflection and journaling every Sunday, and to protect that time like it was a client meeting. And 1 person on her team that she would invest in developing. On paper, that's maybe 6 hours a week added, but it was intentional, consistent, and compounding. For the first 3 months, nothing visible changed. Her team didn't suddenly perform better, revenue didn't spike, she was still at 33 degrees. But she was in the process of becoming. By month 6, she had read 6 books. She had absorbed over 50 podcast episodes of content. She had been journaling consistently. Her leadership perspective had shifted. She had developed her operations manager into someone who could handle operations decisions independently. By month 12, the compounding became visible. Revenue increased 34%. Profit margins improved. Her team's engagement jumped, and she went from 70 hours a week to 48 hours. By month 18, she'd hit 2.8 million in revenue. Her team had grown from 8 to 14 people. And most importantly, she was leading from a place of growing capacity, not diminishing reserves. She told me, "Tyler, I was so focused on reaching the destination that I never invested in becoming the person who could sustain it. The process didn't slow me down, it actually set me up." That's what consistency compounds into. So, how do you build your leadership development process? First off, write it down. Don't leave it to inspiration or motivation. Build a concrete plan. Here's the framework. First, commit to 1 leadership book per month, not 10 books a quarter. Consistency beats intensity. 1 book. Read it, reflect on it, and apply 1 principle to your business. Second, choose 1 podcast per week. Maybe something on entrepreneurship or business strategy or biblical leadership. Personally, I love the Acquired podcast and the All In podcast, but pick whatever fills your gap. Listen during commutes, workouts, or meal prep. Thirdly, schedule reflection and mentorship time. 1 hour on a Sunday for journaling. What did I learn this week? Where did I fall short? What's my growth edge? And a monthly mentorship call with someone ahead of you, someone who's already solved problems you're facing. Fourth, put it on your calendar. If it's not on your calendar, it's not real. Your leadership development isn't an optional add-on. It's the foundation of everything else. Consistency compounds. And here's what separates good leaders from great leaders. It's the ability to develop continuously, not just rely on your natural giftings. This will be your differentiator. But don't stop with yourself. And this is critical. Jesus spent more time developing people than he did performing miracles. Why? Because he knew the miracle of multiplication happens through mentorship. Identify 1 person on your team who has potential. Invest in them. Give them a book. Coach them through some challenges. Celebrate their growth. When you develop others, you're multiplying your own capacity exponentially. That's the compounding effect. Your growth compounds, your team's growth compounds, and your organization's growth compounds. You might be thinking, "Tyler, I don't have time to go slow. My market is moving fast and my competition isn't waiting." Listen, I get it, but ask yourself this. Do you have time to rebuild what impatience breaks? Rushing creates fragility. Process creates foundation. When you skip development and burn out your team, when you make reactive decisions instead of strategic ones, when you build systems dependent entirely on you, that's not speed. That's fragility masquerading as velocity. The fastest way to the top isn't sudden, it's steady. Intensity burns out, but consistency compounds. You can sprint for a few months and see results, but you can't sprint for a decade. Walk steadily for 10 years though, and you'll end up miles ahead of anyone who sprinted and then collapsed. If you want sustainable success, the kind that lasts decades and transforms lives, consistency beats intensity every single time. Here's your challenge this week. First, actually write your personal leadership development plan and be specific. Which book? Which podcast? When will you journal? Who will you ask to mentor you? Who will you invest in developing? Put dates on the calendar. And second, I need you to comment below with your first step. Make it public because accountability matters. Third, subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. It's the law of navigation. This is how Jesus charted impossible missions with absolute clarity. Because vision without navigation is just frustration. And I'm going to show you how to lead your team through doubt, obstacles, and opposition without losing clarity or momentum. Remember, the process isn't slowing you down, it's actually setting you up. 1 degree, 1 decision, and 1 day at a time. When your moment comes, and it will come, will you be ready? This is Mission Driven Profits. Keep building. See you next video.